This presentation is directed toward people who want to start interviewing with the faith development interview. However, we want to stress that this is important to make yourself familiar with the theory of religious styles research first. Otherwise, you won't be able to generate answers that are later usable for evaluation. So if you haven't seen our videos introducing the theoretical background, please go back to those first. This is the agenda for this interview. First, we will give you a short overview of the interview itself. After that, you will get an outline of how the whole interview process should be structured, starting with advice regarding preparation for the interview, before talking a bit about interview strategies. So, the faith development interview consists of 25 questions, covering the areas of life review, relationships, values and commitments, and religion and worldview. A sample question for the life review section is, reflecting on your life thus far, identify its major chapters. Another question from the values and commitments section is, what do you think about death? What happens to us when we die? These examples may give you an idea of the depth that this interview format may go into. We ask really personal questions and the answers may take a long time. Often an interview lasts 2 hours or even longer. If you encounter skeptical participants, you can assure them that the interview also provides benefits for themselves. The FDI offers a space where it is possible to explore faith in one's own biography. It offers the opportunity to think about big questions of morality and religion. And, as most of our questions are not everyday questions, the participants also have the possibility to find new and surprising answers. But, and this is really important and the reason why we are doing this video here, the interviewer has to create a situation where the interviewee feels comfortable enough to take their space. So, as a first step, it is important to make sure you have an appointment that suits both you and your interviewee's needs. Please make sure to inform the person you want to interview about the time frame. They should plan for at least 2 to 3 hours. Nobody wants to rush through this questionnaire. You will not generate answers with narrative content if one of you is always looking at the time. Moreover, you will have to record the interview for later transcription and therefore need a signed consent form from the participants. Please make sure your interviewee has time to read the consent form and make sure they sign it before you start the interview. The participants usually won't know in advance what they are getting into, so you should inform them about the contents of the interview. For that purpose, it has proven useful to name the 4 sections of the interview during the first contact with the participant. That way, they can prepare for questions concerning their biography, for example, and won't be surprised because they expected something completely different. Note, the following advices focus on a face-to-face interview situation and might need adaptation when you conduct a phone interview or web interview. So, make sure you and your interviewee are in an agreeable atmosphere that creates enough privacy for them to open up and tell you about their life. A cafe might therefore not be the ideal spot for an interview. When you finally meet your interview partner, make sure the interviewee is aware of the time frame. Again, 2 to 3 hours is a realistic estimate. If this hasn't happened in the run-up of the interview, have the participants sign the consent form. You might want to bring a second copy in case the interviewee wants one for themselves. Again, tell the interviewee about the structure of the interview, for example, by naming again the 4 sections. But even more importantly, create an awareness for the special situation by pointing out some of the characteristics. It makes sense to sensitize the interviewee for the fact that breaks might occur. Unlike in a normal conversation, it is totally fine to overthink your answer for a few seconds. Breaks should be seen as a chance to rearrange one's thoughts, since the questions we ask are neither commonplace nor simple. This is not easy, since it is contrary to normal conversation principles. Assure the interviewee that they are the expert for their own life and for the topics that are relevant while unfolding the life narrative. Make sure the interviewee knows you are not there to challenge their view or test their knowledge. Tell them that your job is to listen and to ask probing questions in case there is something you do not understand. Assure them that there are no wrong answers to our questions. Before you ask the first question, make sure you have the interview guideline handy. Check one last time if your recording device works as it should, and ask the participant if there are any questions regarding the interview they want to ask beforehand. When all that is accomplished, you can finally start conducting the faith development interview. The next few slides will give you some important advice concerning interview strategies that will help keeping up a good interview atmosphere and generate codable material for your evaluation. It goes without saying that you should stick to the order of the questions as written down in the guideline. It may seem tempting from time to time to pull forward a question because it fits the participant's answer. But for the sake of the interview dynamic as well as evaluation process, you should not give in to that temptation. Furthermore, try not to change the wording of the questions. As you may have noted while reading the interview questions, there are multiple questions that have one or more sub-questions. During the interview, use these as probing questions and ask them one after the other in order to not overstrain the interviewee. If the questions offer different options, for example, groups, institutions, ideals, it is okay for the interviewee to pick out those that appeal to them the most. It is not necessary to have a statement on each of those subcategories. It will happen from time to time that an interviewee will elaborate on a topic that comes up later in the questionnaire. Please don't omit the question anyway. The interviewee should get the chance to talk about the subject again. Maybe they will do so more extensively or with a slightly different approach elicited by the question. And again, allow breaks. It is okay if there are breaks in the conversation. It might be good to wait a bit longer than seems generally acceptable. Reassure the interviewee if they think they need to give an answer immediately. As an interviewer, be aware that you are asking the questions in the mindset of the research project. Nevertheless, the well-being of both you and the interviewee always comes first. You don't have to relive the interviewee's life story. On the other hand, it is okay to show empathy, of course. To get the role straight, it might be helpful to emphasize the form of the interview. It does not need to be a continuing conversation. Sudden changes of topics may occur. As has been said before, the questions are not always easy to understand. So if the interviewee does not understand a question, your first step is simply to repeat it. You might also show the written question to them if that helps. If that doesn't help, you can try to paraphrase the question without too much of your own interpretation. Maybe try a formulation that is closer to your interviewee's background. Try to make as few specifications on the direction of a question as possible. Emphasize that each individual may find their own access to the answer. It may seem tempting to refer to something that has been said in the interview before. If possible, don't do that. It will bias the interviewee's answers. Listening actively should be self-evident, and be aware this is hard work. Apart from the usual conversational signals that indicate you're listening, like nonverbal comments, you should ask questions taking up what the interviewer just told you. For example, certain terms or concepts can be paraphrased in order to make sure you understood what the interviewee inferred. It is okay to ask if you think the interviewee might want to elaborate more and just needs some encouragement. But don't be too persistent. It is part of the study design to only analyze what the interviewee tells us deliberately. And of course, you don't want to make the interviewee feel like they are sitting an exam. Accepting the interviewee is another important thing that goes along with that. Even though this may be hard at times, try to stay neutral with respect to opinions. Stay in your role as an interviewer, which is sometimes an effort if you get addressed as ally, as opponent, or as a therapist or father confessor. A lot of people will be curious to hear your opinion or your answer to the questions. If you are comfortable with that, you can answer any question, but do that after the interview is finished. The next slides will deal with some difficult interview situations you might encounter. One type of interviewee you may encounter is the taciturn type. Some people will give very short answers which don't give you enough material for evaluation later. So you need to come prepared with questions that can serve as follow-up questions and may elicit some more elaborate responses. For example, a question that is answered with a simple no might be countered with a pointed why not. Another possibility is to ask for an example. Keep in mind that for the sake of your evaluation, you want to have rather lengthy answers, and open questions are what keeps the interview going and elicit narratives. On the other hand, you will also have participants who, even for your purposes, talk too much. Here, you should train how to interrupt politely, without affronting your interview partner. There are body signals like leaning forward or even raising your hand slightly to show that you would like to say something. Sometimes, however, you will have to be more active and prepare phrases that you can say like, "May I chime in here?" If you feel like a person could be more on the talkative side, you may set a more strict time frame. It may also be helpful for a wandering mind to have a look at the question again to see whether the answer is still fitting the question that was asked. You may also encounter situations where people tell you about life events that are difficult to deal with. Especially the life review section may elicit stories about trauma, abuse, war, and so on. If that happens, you should make clear that, of course, interviewees should only tell as much as they are willing to. In this case, it may be even adequate to skip some questions if you or your interview partner feel these are too much and going too deep. Try to stay in your role as an interviewer, but nevertheless show empathy and/or sympathy so that the interviewee feels seen and taken seriously. You might offer to take a break if the interviewee seems to be very consumed with a negative topic. And the well-being of you and your interviewee should always be top priority. Don't try to finish the interview at all costs if it makes you or the interviewee feel bad. Last but not least, when the interview is over, of course you should thank the interviewee for sharing so many personal thoughts with you. As a last question, ask them whether they want to add something that they may have forgotten to say during the interview. If that is not the case, you can end the recording. Point out that the interviewee may contact you or the team in case they have any further questions. For information about the ongoing research, they may be referred to your website if you have one. So, this was quite a lot of information. You will need some practice before you remember all the advices given to you in this presentation. But with all of this in mind, you will be able to conduct interviews that serve as good material for later evaluation. Thank you for listening.